compliment. Say, well, come. Let me show you. This is not a compliment where you just say, yeah. No, you have to voice and say you're smart or something like that. Are you ready? All right, band, come on, give us something upbeat. Something up. Come on now. We need to feel the vibe. All right, let's go. Move around at least 3 different people. Give them a genuine compliment. Say, oh, everybody is down. You are very smart. Yes. Come on, move around. 3 different people, come on. You still have a whole minute. Even the MC has got a compliment. Yeah, you have 45 seconds. Mr. Chukwas, I love your water. So ladies and gentlemen, once you feel your tank is full, you can take your seats. Once you're happy with your compliments, you can take your seats. That's enough complimenting, Dorothy. That's enough. Someone is over complimenting our evening. Once you feel you've been complimented enough, you can take your seats. And I'll compliment Chicago. Beautiful attires, wonderful music. You're doing a good job. If you didn't get a compliment, feel free to raise your hand and change your neighbors, okay? I noticed I said compliment 3 different people. I saw someone compliment. I don't know what your agenda was, but my name is Ronnie and I'll be your host today, and I'll be back in a short while. But allow me, of course, acknowledge the presence of our Minister for National under the ICT Ministry, Honorable Kamayanda Godfrey Baluku, who is here with us today. Can we just clap for him? Thank you so much for honoring our invite and for keeping time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we are just about ready to usher in the virtual audience. So I'm just going to take my seat. We'll have a countdown, and I'll be right
We stand on the brink of a technological revolution that has fundamentally altered the way we live, work, and relate to one another, where personal data in the 21st century is like oil in the 18th century. The first industrial revolution used water and steam power to mechanize production. The second used electric power to create mass production. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production. Now, a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third. The digital revolution that has been occurring since the middle of the last century and has a complex relationship with privacy. Unlike other industrial revolutions, this revolution deals more with the information. Personal data has already turned out to be a new commodity. The more information gets generated and accumulated, the more it is maximally exposed, more than the world has ever seen. Anyways, it depends fundamentally on leveraging data on people and everything they do. That's where the magic of the digital society resides, and thereby threatening privacy, the right of individuals to do things on their own terms without others knowing or sharing them if they don't want. In the past, exploiting data was more difficult and expensive. It took a lot of money and resources, human and computing, to analyze even quite small data sets. Researchers used file cards instead of databases. Authoritarian governments needed huge numbers of staff to monitor even smaller numbers of dissidents. Now, massive data sets are routinely analyzed, not just on their own, but in combination with one another, in quantities and ways and details that were entirely impossible before today's computers were available. New technologies and platforms have increasingly enabled citizens to engage with governments, voice their opinions, coordinate their efforts, and even circumvent the supervision of public authorities. Simultaneously, governments have gained new technological powers to increase their control over populations based on pervasive surveillance systems and the ability to control digital infrastructure. On the whole, however, governments increasingly face pressure to change their current approach to public engagement and policy making, as their central role of conducting policy diminishes owing to new sources of competition and the redistribution, call it decentralization of power, that new technologies make possible. Ultimately, the ability of government systems and public authorities to adapt to the technology revolution will determine their survival in a world of rapid, disruptive change. This will be particularly true in the realm of regulation. Current systems of public policy and decision-making evolved alongside the second industrial revolution, when decision makers had time to study a specific issue and develop the necessary response or appropriate regulatory framework. The whole process was designed to be linear and mechanistic, following a strict top-down approach. But such an approach is no longer feasible, given the fourth industrial revolution's rapid pace of change and broad impacts. Legislators and regulators are being challenged to an unprecedented degree, and for the most part are proving unable to cope. How then can they preserve the interest of the consumers and the public at large while continuing to support innovation and technological development? By embracing agile governance, just as the private sector has increasingly adopted agile responses to software development and business operations more generally. This means regulators must continuously adapt to a new, fast-changing environment, reinventing themselves so they can truly understand what it is they are regulating. To do so, governments and regulatory agencies will need to collaborate closely with business and civil society. Now, in the end, it all comes down to people and values, not so? We need to shape a future that works for all of us by putting people first and empowering them. In its most pessimistic, dehumanized form, the fourth industrial revolution may indeed have the potential to robotize humanity and thus to deprive us of our heart and soul. But as a complement to the best parts of human nature, creativity, empathy, stewardship, it can also lift humanity into a new collective and moral consciousness based on a shared sense of destiny. It is, therefore, incumbent on us all to make sure the latter prevails.
Thank you very much to our resident band and welcoming our virtual audience. Thank you so much. You are all absolutely welcome. And I will do 52 for this workshop, for this symposium. We have United States of America, Tokyo, Argentina, Brazil, to mention but a few. So for those of you who are online right now, just to drop your name and where you are. I'm going to ask us one more time just to rise to our feet as we get ready to have our anthems. We're going to have 3 anthems. We'll only have the first stanza of each. We'll start with the African Union anthem, then the East African anthem, and then we shall bring it down home. Those of you who are live, as you stand up, again,
Flesh of the sun. On behalf of Unwanted Witness, I take the pleasure to welcome you all to this third edition of the Privacy Symposium Africa 2021.
We acknowledge that businesses and governments need personal data to be able to identify us, to provide services, to understand our needs, to improve the services they provide to us, and many other objectives. However, the personal information must be collected and used in compliance with the various laws governing personal data across the region and the globe.
The world is now moving to ensuring that people live with dignity, their personal information is protected. It's important that civil society plays a critical role in creating awareness around data protection, what it means, how their rights can be achieved.
It is important that anyone who understands this topic also amplifies it. We are making efforts to also speak in our local languages, and that is not very easy when you talk about digital language, but we are making efforts in that area.
How do we protect data? We can use so many controls, but I'll just pull out a few that you can use as an organization. So one of the ways that we can do this is by making data obscure, unclear, or unintelligible. We can use masking, or we can use tokenization to make sure that the personal data that is being transferred, that is in transit, is actually unclear and unintelligible.
Africans are very trusting people, and oftentimes we find ourselves actually willingly giving information with no questions asked.
The national ID has literally become a gateway to access to social services, and I think that is very absurd.
What this means really is that if there's a picture of you online, it could be on your social media profiles, it can be on your professional profiles, it can be on YouTube, then it's very probably in Clearview's database.
Privacy should definitely be a key aspect as we develop these systems.
There is the mindset to provide, some kind of data protection. However, we have fallen short when it comes to implementation.
In a context of the pandemic where there is growing public distrust, where there is public health kind of sort of COVID, people who deny the existence of COVID, one doesn't want to stoke mistrust of government and public institutions. But very often what we're being asked for is not trust so much as faith. And I think it's really, really important at this stage, now that we're looking at a pandemic that has lasted for 1.5 years and may last for a lot longer. Public institutions need to do a lot more to slow down, to review all of the emergency protocols, to disclose a lot more information about lessons learned and failures experienced in the implementation of these different systems.
Digital freedom stops where that of the users begin. Nowadays, digital evolution should never or must no longer be placed to a customer in a trade-off between privacy and security. Why? Because privacy is a valuable asset that should be protected.
Awesome. A round of applause for our Chika troop. I think that's the Lunyege from Toro. I think they deserve a round of applause, at least from our live audience here. Thank you so much. And just before them, we were just about getting ready to have our first speech for the day, a keynote address. This keynote is going to be given by Robert Karanja, all the way from how companies can take action to encourage responsible use of disruptive technologies and mitigate the risks therein. So without further ado, I'll ask us, I don't know if he's going to be virtual, so I need to...
Okay, so I can proceed.
I'll mute my side so that there's no noise interruptions.
No problem. If you need to show me anything, just give me a thumbs up or whatever, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So let me proceed. All right. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third Africa Privacy Symposium. It is a pleasure to have all of you here and to have all of you join us as we discuss the issue of privacy as it relates to the African continent. I wanted to perhaps give a brief background or some brief points on what is the role of the private sector or the role of companies in terms of how can companies take action to encourage the responsible use of disruptive technology in their operations, and how can they also mitigate risks. As the private sector continues to grow across the African continent, whether you're in East, West, Southern, or North Africa, the issue of privacy, and particularly client data or customer data, is becoming more of an important issue, and is also a challenge as companies try and figure out how to best manage client data and how to mitigate against some of the risks that may come should there be a data intrusion. So we know that several big tech companies are delivering widespread convenience across the continent. You know these companies, I wouldn't go and name them one by one. And they're also providing immense value to users and commercial opportunities to both individuals and also businesses. However, many of these companies are multinationals, they operate across borders, and they've also been in situations where they have unchecked market dominance. And you have both an issue of social and political power that will threaten not only individual freedoms, but also economies and democracies across the world, especially in Africa. So therefore, despite the numerous benefits, we can no longer ignore the negative impacts of some of these big tech companies, however unintended they may be. And therefore, we do need to encourage these companies to be more responsible in how they use their technology and also how they manage data, because they're managing data for millions of users. Therefore, it is imperative that we look at making technology safe, inclusive, and also competitive. It should not shut out, small users or small companies who are trying to compete in that space. It's also important to highlight the concerns of widespread online misinformation as it is happening across various global platforms, and also discrimination against vulnerable groups, as well as pervasive surveillance practices that we have seen happen in a number of countries across the continent. You may wonder, what is the issue or the challenge around surveillance capitalism and the attention economy? Technology has meant that we are now running or working in a data-fueled economy, and although it is working for many, in other places, it is also broken down, has become invasive, and in fact, to a certain extent, can be said has become manipulated. So therefore, the challenge really is on technology companies to prevent safety breaches, ensure security of their customers and customer data, and also consumer protection. It should be a basic and not a luxury that those protection and the safeguards and the data protection are in place. More recently, tech companies have also increased the use of algorithms and artificial intelligence in our lives. So there's a great amount of data that is being mined, and the algorithms are much more powerful. The machine learning systems are becoming increasingly complex and opaque, and the potential use of these technologies can not only have a positive impact, but to a certain extent, can also have a negative impact on our lives. And therefore, we do need to encourage not only big tech companies, but private sector companies across the continent to increase the use of more responsibility in their operations, particularly where disruptive technologies are concerned, mitigate risks, and if possible, depending on which jurisdiction that they're working in, ensure that the data protection acts and regulations that are in place in those countries do encourage companies not only to compete, but also to safeguard the data of their customers, not only now, but for prosperity. Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to. Therefore, as global tech companies compete for customers and customer data, we've also seen a convergence of platforms. And therefore, you'll have multinationals such as Facebook will go and invest and buy WhatsApp, they'll buy Instagram. So you as a customer really are restricted in terms of options because these platforms also engage in power and power dynamics. And therefore, you find that as a customer, your data is shared across platforms, very often with little or no consent sought from you. And advertising may be pushed towards you. You may find that offers are made towards you. Your data, is found on other platforms or even with third-party users without your consent, and that's a real challenge. And as many of African countries are still in the very early stages of developing data protection offices and data protection acts, we need to take those challenges into consideration so that the data protection acts are relevant for the current challenges that are facing, the African continent and our consumers. The other second point that I wanted to make that I think is important is how do these international tech companies or tech platforms manage our data? And we have seen instances, and I'll just briefly give an example that's in the public domain. For example, Safe Border, which had collected customer data for several years, and then that customer data was sold to third parties without the consent or the permission of the users themselves. And therefore, that
Are you in Argentina right now?
Yes, I'm in Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Argentina.
Excellent. All right. Okay. All right. Now we have that working well. Let me just begin with you on what are the privacy and data protection concerns relating to smart cities? Considering that, we've been talking data protection from day one, I'd like us to just go straight into the concerns, that come up when we talk about smart cities.
City is a very ambiguous term, no? I mean, it means different things for different people, and it has been used to name initiatives. Despite all this, I don't see using that data. No? So considering my experience, I see that is the most pressing issue. No? We don't have information about how citizen data are being used by the government. No? So and the private companies as well. No? So that would be my first concern.
As an implementer of technologies, we actually work a lot with governments in implementing different kinds of technologies, but also working on open data. And I think that there's, obviously there are private sector companies that also collect a lot of personal data, and particularly in the context of digital identity. If you look at a country like South Africa, which has quite a lot of decentralized digital identity, not a lot of foundational digital identity. So you get a lot of functional identity systems, systems that perform a specific function. And with each of these kinds of initiatives, there are different dynamics in play between government and the private sector frequently. Because what you find, with a lot of technology deployment, I see it in South Africa and I see it in other regions, but I'll talk largely to South Africa, given my experience, that most of this technology deployment is done in some kind or form of partnership with the private sector, given limited, I don't want to say limited technology capacities, because that sounds not how I intended to mean, but like there is limited technology development capacity within a lot of public sector environments currently. And so what that means is you frequently have both public sector and private sector access to the same kinds of data, which is frequently distributed amongst systems. and the complexity of where the burdens lie in terms of keeping that information protected, with often private sector companies trying to divert some of their responsibilities, not considering themselves to be social or public facing companies, and with governments also. I see in South Africa still currently with both low will and capacity to themselves respect emerging data governance frameworks. So yeah, I think there are a lot of leakage points that need to be considered, particularly given the intersections.
All right, thank you.
Exactly.
All right, excellent, excellent. So I hope you were able to hear.
No, I think you're using an important word here. The way we checking a tick box and saying you agree to whatever that you agree to share your data. And obviously there are legal frameworks like GDPR in Europe that are trying to to improve, because this would be a very limited understanding of consent, especially when you don't really have a choice. But there's definitely something very unique to cities and to the public space, which is that when you step into the streets, if there is all sorts of technologies, from facial recognition, from data being collected, maybe from your phone, that are impacting your right to privacy, you do not get to consent to this. The mere fact of walking the street become a mark of consent, and this is, I think, something this is why it's so important to have a conversation as a society about what do we tolerate that's happening in the streets, and not assume consent, not assume that because there hasn't been sort of strong criticism of what's happening, then that means it's okay. So that's, I think, something we need to really challenge. But the one thing I just wanted to say also, maybe to wrap up, is that the reason we even have this conversation, the reason we even think about the question of surveillance and data protection in the context of smart cities, comes down to who gets to define what smart cities are, and why are smart cities actually so relying on data and on data connection? Is that the only way we can make our cities smart?
Thank you, thank you. To Brian, who is in the room with me, Brand. Some people have argued that, you know, smart cities are really synonymous with surveillance cities. From the work you've been doing and, you know, learning from other jurisdictions, is this an accurate, you know, representation of the whole idea?
Thanks so much. Well, I'll give a lawyer's favorite answer, yes and no. Yeah, but yes, in the sense that there are two approaches worldwide to this kind of thing. The first is being a purely surveillance state, and China would be a very great example of that. So in this state, the government watches everything you do. They collect all data and they direct what's done with the data. Then on the other hand, we have the light touch approach, favored usually in the United States and Western Europe, where there is a free market. Companies and private sectors collect data and choose what to do with it. So it is yes and no, but I think for Africa, we can find a workable middle ground. We can have a situation where the public is involved, the private sector is involved, and there is oversight by the regulators, the relevant authorities. In this case, NITA would be one great example. Yeah, so yes and no, but there can be a middle ground to answer your question.
All right, part of your answer has dictated that I actually put the next question to your neighbor. Afande Anatoli has joined us. Afande, you're welcome. We did introduce you in detail, including the fact that you're a PhD student before you walked in, but we are glad that you're able to join us. Afande, part of, you know, these digital technologies are actually justified for the protection of citizens, for, you know, detecting crime. As, you know, someone from law enforcement, how do you ensure that, whereas those positive aspects are needed, the privacy of citizens is still respected, even as this data is collected, let's say, to their advantage?
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you very much, my colleague. And to all, good afternoon. I'm sorry I came earlier than maybe any one of you, but because of other engagements, I had to leave. Nonetheless, I have found all of you, and therefore I will try to match the level at which we can be able to move together in the realm of the subject under discussion. Mr. Gabriel and our listeners, you'll all agree that it is the role of government to ensure both the protection of the private individual and public interest. And aware of that, in the dawn of the new technology for which we are discussing right now, there's been a lot of advantages for which really individuals have exploited for their personal gains. But besides that, this has come with a cost of compromising public security. Therefore, like my colleague has come in, government entities like NITA come in to do regulate both the individual and private interests. There is no a bigger parameter for which I could say that individual interests can be able to compromise public security. And therefore, for that matter, the government takes its role in ensuring that both private and public interests are well regulated. Why? In the wake-up of this technology, you'll all agree with me that a number of new crimes have come up, especially the cyber crime related to terrorism, money laundering, even any form of communication for whatever you may have with an insinuation of committing crime. So as a way to ensure that public security is not compromised, the essence of it is then to ensure that those government entities that are interested to play that role have to do it. Now, we as the Uganda Police Force do uphold the enjoyment of your rights, but at the same time, we work hand in hand with the other other government regulatory bodies. Like, for example, my brother has talked about NITA, but in this case, we have also the Uganda Communication Commission, we have the Uganda Intelligence Authority, among others, for which we really need to work together to ensure that while you are entitled to enjoy your private interests, public security is not compromised for that matter.
All right.
So it is all about, it's good that really in this bid to ensure that both the private and public interests are not compromised, we raise awareness. Maybe the question we need to discuss here is, where do private and public interests start and end from? Maybe that will be another discussion for another day. But we all need to see that stability and security is all upheld and promoted.
Actually, aspects of that question were discussed in a panel, I believe, on day 2. And yes, that has been spoken about. But let's use police, since that's where you come from. The personal data that the police collects, do you actually inform the citizens of what data of theirs they have, and how do you keep it safe?
Incidentally, the management of data in the Uganda Police Force, given the level of technology, is something that has now been stepped up with a lot of vigor, especially with the establishment of our Directorate of ICT. Then along with the Directorate of ICT, we have our Directorate of Forensic Science. Then also more capabilities have been built up in the Directorate of CID. One, there are 2 forms of data in this regard which we are trying to talk about. There is data related to crime, and then there is data related to prevention. Say, for example, the installation of our surveillance cameras on the road. Those are basically gadgets that are installed to ensure prevention and collection of data related to certain incidences that happen in some places. Whereas instances of criminality, that data is stored and managed by our Directorate of CID, which is supported by CI and forensic laboratory, where, for example, if somebody is suspected to have committed a crime or he's about to commit a crime, there is a way that profiling of such individual is done in order to ensure that we gather enough information about such a person.
All right. Alice, I'd like to come over to you. Something that more than one of our panelists has said is the fact that these technologies are advanced, they're expensive, and therefore in many cases, even as they are applied in African cities, they're not developed in those cities. A lot of it is not managed there. How exactly is safety of this data that's being collected ensured when the procurement and a lot of the management is external? Alice, I hope you're there. Yes, very faintly. Very faintly, but clearer. But you can go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, much better, Alice.
You can hear me? Okay, fair enough. I think give a few what government of more identify some of these vulnerabilities that definitely would come with the use of these new emerging technologies, because that's something that so many people are not aware of. Everyone is very quick to adapt the new technologies on the market, but without really understanding the vulnerabilities that they present. So identifying the various security threats that some of these technologies present is extremely key. Developing regulations, that's also something that I would recommend. When you have effective regulations, then it becomes much easier to govern smart cities, because there you have all these like modern technologies, at least, kind of under control or check. I know for certain the emerging technologies keep, evolving, and of course, definitely our regulation must also, keep up with the pace. Otherwise, they'll be redundant. Then lastly, I think that data must be encrypted. So whatever government does, when you collect people's data, please make sure that it's safe, and come up with maybe also some like two-factor authentication where someone that uses a password and is also able to use some other method for you to access their data. I think we can definitely have safe smart cities. We shouldn't run away from them. We shouldn't shy away from them. The most important thing is that how secure is our data. And I'm sure government or private entities or these companies, the huge big companies that take this data on behalf of government or for whatever reason, just make sure that the data is safe. Thank you.
Kagan, can you hear me? Mr. Hamani? Your microphone is muted, at least from what I see on my screen.
Hello?
Yes, Alice, it's okay. Thank you very much. We could hear you. I'm just trying to get to Mr. Hamani.
I can't hear.
Him. All right. Mr. Habasa, should we attempt an entertainment break as we solve the technical issue? All right. Let's have an entertainment break. All right, Mr. Hamani, can you confirm that you can now hear us? Well, doesn't seem like he can. So let's have that entertainment break as the technical team solves the audio issues.
Lele